Today on Market Journal, new research is using remote sensing technology to help farmers make irrigation decisions. We'll talk with one of the project's managers. Mike Briggs is here to offer his projections for cattle prices and inventory numbers going into 2020. And farmers facing financial stress are turning to high interest rate loans. Hear when that's a good idea and when it's not. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. We're broadcasting today from the 13th annual Nebraska Power Farming Show at the Lancaster Event Center in Lincoln. Now this show is billed as the second largest indoor ag show in the country with over 2,000 booths packed into more than 9 acres. Here producers will find things to help make the farm more productive, lower input costs, and hopefully help their bottom line. The show's director calls it an agricultural megastore, and we're going to have more highlights from the show later on in today's show. But starting off, a federal grant has allowed for a UNL educator to lead the third leg of a multi-part project which will help producers make easier irrigation decisions. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh has more on this story.
There's no doubt about it, crops need water, but water can come at a high cost. UNL hydrogeophysicist Trenton Franz is working on a project that will save producers money while still effectively irrigating their fields.
So this is a new USDA project in the cyber physical systems solicitation. And so the project brings together a group of scientists from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Princeton University, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And the goal of the project is to produce better products using remote sensing and modeling as well as field observations to really get at useful data products for irrigators like better rainfall, evapotranspiration for crops, as well as soil moisture in the soil. So, when you think about the cost of actual production, is energy costs are an important factor as well as not impacting crop yield. And so any products that we design, looking at sort of sustainability, environmental stewardship, have to consider in those sort of environmental costs as well as economics.
The $900,000 grant awarded to this project is provided by the National Science Foundation in partnership with the USDA. It'll be split evenly among the 3 colleges, with Illinois initiating the project and Nebraska bringing up the rear.
Illinois is the lead on the project. They have a remote sensing specialist. Caillou Guan is the lead PI. And so he'll be working with the remote sensing data, and he's developed some algorithms to merge different remote sensing products to produce a daily 10-meter resolution evapotranspiration product that removes cloud effects, which is a huge problem in the remote sensing world right now. The second piece will be from Princeton University. Ming Pan is the lead scientist on that, and he's an expert in hydrological modeling, so he'll be using the remote sensing data and combining that with the hydrological models. And the final piece will be the University of Nebraska, which I'm the lead PI on, and we'll be doing some of the ground truthing of the data sets, as well as collecting some variables as well, and then interfacing with farmers as well as Nebraska Extension.
Trenton says Nebraska is ground zero in terms of irrigation, which is why UNL was selected as the third partner in the project. Although still in early stages, Trenton and his team have already started preparing for their part.
Yep. So we just started the project this summer is when the final word came from the USDA. So it'll be a 3-year long project. And so we're just getting started. So we'll hire a couple of students as well as postdoctoral researchers to start to get going on the field collection. So collect a little bit of data this summer. Right now, a lot of the work's being done with the remote sensing data and a hydrological model, and we're hoping to have some, beta versions of those products out next growing season. So we'll start to, really pick up, starting to talk to different producer groups, in April, May, and start getting some of the data in the hands of them for some initial testing.
Overall, Trenton believes this project will not only help producers, but the environment as well.
When we talk about sustainability, thinking about sort of the economic aspects of that is critical as well. Just beyond being good stewards of the environment. And so I think that's one thing that we need to consider is some of the economic impacts as well as influences on how we think about conservation and those things. So that's one thing that this project is nice is it's directly interfacing with agricultural producers and looking at sustainability issues. So I think that's just something important to consider.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. Trenton says the project is also in partnership with the Nature Conservancy in Nebraska, the Nebraska Water Balance Alliance, and the Nebraska Natural Resource Districts. We'll continue to follow it. Time for a look at the cattle markets now, and our guest this week is Mike Briggs from Briggs Feed Yard in Seward. And with 2019 winding down, there are some things we need to be watching. Mike, thanks for being with us today. Where do you see cattle prices headed as we end the year and gear up for 2020?
Well, I actually went back and watched our last show, so I didn't repeat myself or look stupider. We talked about last time we thought this thing would just grind higher, and that's exactly what it's done. And there's some things that are really good for once that are happening in the market. That plant that burned down that was offline has actually started to come online 30 days earlier than they thought it would. So that helps us. We've worked through our biggest numbers, and I think we're in really good shape. Now we're going to hit the holidays, and that's always a problem because you lose harvest days because of holidays, obviously, and your demand kind of wavers in there. But I think we've got a couple of good weeks here before the holidays, and you got to kind of stumble through the holidays. And then we get into that first quarter where I think things are much more in our favor because that plant will be up and rolling full speed. Plus, we're going to finally tighten up our numbers to maybe we've got a little chance to regain a little leverage with the packer.
And what's the overall herd looking like come January?
That's going to be a great question because we get our yearly herd size or inventory in January, and that's going to be really interesting because there was all the talk about all the calf losses in the spring. Well, nobody really knows. And the thing that's interesting to me is you have seen above normal cow slaughter the entire year. You don't have a drought. So why are you having this immense cow slaughter? Well, I think a lot of that is, and I've heard from different ranchers, that the conception rate out west is as low as 70%. So if you got 30% of your herd that didn't breed, those guys don't keep those around. They send them away. So I think that may be where some of your cow slaughter numbers are. And so you may have had a bigger constriction in the cow supply than the market thinks. And that'll really make things interesting going forward.
Is it kind of a snowball effect? More slaughter this year means fewer cows calving next year, means fewer feeders. Would that be accurate to say?
That's actually right where I'm going. And we don't even know. Your placements in October were big, but they weren't bigger than the market anticipated. And it's going to be really interesting to see what we see in November. Maybe the calves aren't really there. Maybe we did lose a lot. Now, there was some really terrible reports earlier where it talked about we lost 1 million head. That's totally erroneous. That's not what happened, but it's starting to appear like losses were fairly significant. And like I said, that conception rate, you start taking those cows out of this deal, well then that goes into next year and the year after because it takes a long time to get that made back up.
I wanted to talk about choice and select beef too. For 17 of the 21 weeks from July 6th to November 23rd, the weekly average choice select spread was the largest for that week of the year over the past 2 decades. Explain to us what that means.
We actually talked about that in the last show. At that time, I thought it was interesting that the choice select spread at that time was $27. And we talked about anytime you see that spread, that's because there's an intense amount of demand for choice product driving that apart, because there's only so much choice product. It also tells you that they don't want select because they're willing to pay for quality. And that's always good, because the better the grade of the meat is, the better quality that meat is in theory. And so that's what customers want, that's what they like, and they're willing to pay for it, and that's great to see. That also tells you that just demand is just flat excellent. And so that's really encouraging. When you see that close in really hard, that's a little frustrating, because that means you're starting to lag demand a little too much.
Any other advice or preparations we should make ahead of 2020?
I think that first quarter next year is going to be really good, but the placements are all getting hammered against April, May, June, like they always do. And so I think it's imperative that you watch your break evens and look for your opportunities. Now, they talked about us having a bad winter, and knock, knock, knock on wood, it's not been too bad. So hopefully we can get through this thing. But gosh, if that winter gets bad on us, you got to be careful. So you always got to be really prudent with what you do going into the winter with your risk management. But I think there'll be some real good profitable opportunities going forward.
And finally, Mike, December cattle on feed report next week. Give us an idea of what you think we'll see.
Well, once again, you want to see the placements, because what that December report is actually what went on in November. And October and November feeder placements are usually really big. And I don't think November is going to be that big. You're not seeing the big runs in the sale barn. Now, that's not trying to say that the cattle aren't there. I think because of these lower feeder prices, these guys have kind of moved their supply around, and they've started to wean their calves. They're going to come to market at different times, which is good, because then we don't pile up so many fat cattle in a certain time period. But I think those calves are getting kind of massaged around a little bit, and the placements might be below expectations. We'll once again throw a little more gas on the cattle fire, so that would be good.
Thanks again to Mike for being on the show. Always love to hear from him. Time now for this week's trivia question, and let's get into the Christmas season with this one. Approximately how many choose and harvest Christmas tree farms are in Nebraska? Is it 10, 15, 20, or is it 25? Make your guess, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. Next up, Pat Steffen is farming the same land where he and his siblings grew up near Fordyce in Cedar County. But Pat and his wife Julie, along with their son Robert and his wife Laura, are farming the land in a much different way. For over 30 years, the Steffen operation has evolved into a grass-based system that takes advantage of native prairie pastures that remain essentially the same as they were hundreds of years ago. And that's combined with highly productive lowland pastures that were reseeded to a grass and legume mixture after several decades of row crop farming. Read about the Steffen's grass-based system in the December Nebraska Farmer. And we're going to take a break from all the action at the Power Farming Show to send it back to the studio for this week's weather. Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher is here with the forecast. And Al, how does it look?
Well, Troy, it's been an interesting couple of weeks here since we've seen the storm system move through the Central Plains during the Thanksgiving Day period. And of course, we've seen some residual systems move through our region, but nothing that really concerning in terms of significant accumulations. And even this past week, we had a couple Arctic fronts move through the region. And we did touch up some light snow here earlier in the week, a very intense band that moved through. It was a very short-lived band, fast moving, but we've seen most reports anywhere from a half an inch to about an inch and a half across the eastern half of the state. And then, of course, the cold air set in for a few days, and we're back into this warming pattern, and that basically lasted this entire week until the cold front come through last night, and we've seen some light snowfall across northwestern Nebraska. But a completely different picture this winter so far compared to last winter, where the heavier snow was confined primarily to the southern one-third of the state, as we had a very active southern stream. And this year we haven't quite seen the amount of storms coming out of the southwest. They've been more in the northerly direction, bringing a lot of that colder air in. That pattern kind of broke down in the middle of November, and we've been the beneficiary of above normal temperatures for pretty much these first 2 weeks of December. And looking at the departures from normal, the biggest departures from normal are, of course, across east central, southeast, and south central Nebraska, where we've had the lack of snowfall, running about 6 to 8 degrees above normal for the month. But as you get into the northwest part of the state, running 2 to 3 degrees above normal, and primarily these areas that are the coolest are where we had the more significant snowpack. Now most of that has disappeared. So within a week and a half, we're going to be at Christmas, and the big question is, will we have a white Christmas? We'll get to that here right after at the end of the forecast. So as we go to what's going on presently, that system that moved through last night, the energy is now moving to the southeast of us. The southern stream is very active, bringing systems in through California and then taking them through the southern plains. We have areas of low pressure stacked up from essentially California eastward to the Texas Panhandle. That is allowing a little bit of moisture to spread into our region, but mostly just light flurry activity, and most of that's a result of the wave that just passed us. By the time we get into Sunday morning, we're going to see this trough deepening. Low pressure starts to develop just to the portion of east central New Mexico, and we have high pressure to our east. It's going to slow the momentum of this system. So we're looking at some snow starting to break out during the afternoon hours, and it will increase as we go into Monday morning as the main system itself starts to eject toward the Ohio River Valley and cold Arctic air starts to move into the backside of it. Would not be surprised to see a couple inches of snowfall accumulating in southeastern Nebraska. Con models are picking up on it. But it looks like as you get toward the northwest part of the state, basically just flurry. Now by Tuesday, that cold air starts to pivot to the west or to the east. We start to see a warming trend in western Nebraska. It's going to take another day to get into eastern Nebraska, so we're going to be well below normal with temperatures confined in the 20s. 30s start to pop up on Tuesday in the west. We'll be in the 20s here in the east, and then this ridge starts to build up into our region as another trough approaches the western United States. So we're going to start to see temperatures move toward the normal to above normal side in western Nebraska, more normal here in eastern Nebraska with highs primarily in the mid to upper 30s. Most of the snowfall moves over to the Great Lakes region. By the time we get to Thursday, we see another piece of energy trying to move through the southern plains, and with that, low pressure starts developing deeper into the southern Texas Panhandle. The biggest question is, as this system starts to curve up toward the northeast, will the cold air move in fast enough to keep the system to the south of Nebraska? And right now, the numerical models are indicating that is going to be the case as this wave really starts to strengthen as it gets into the eastern portions of Texas. That means that as it moves toward the northeast, the most likely area that would see any accumulating snowfall would be extreme southeastern Nebraska, and even here, we are in the northern fringe of it. The better news is, as we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, with another major storm system coming into the western seaboard, we're going to see a big ridge start to build up into the central part of the United States, and we're going to go well above normal. We'll be looking back into 40s and 50s all the way through basically the 22nd to 23rd, and then we start to pay attention to this trough moving in from the western seaboard. You can kind of see that the 8 to 14 day forecast from CPC is indicating the presence of the storm. They're showing below normal precipitation. Now this runs through the 22nd. Basically on the 23rd, the system starts to come out, and it looks like, and pay attention to the weather, we'll update this next week, the possibility that we will see some snow development across the central plains on Christmas and the day after Christmas. So overall, it looks like a fairly benign pattern this week. Most of the major weather is going to occur on Monday before we start to see warmer weather build in at the end of the week.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked about how many choose and harvest Christmas tree farms are in Nebraska. The answer is B, 15. Next up, here at the Nebraska Power Farming Show, there are several seminars tailored to farmers with questions about running a successful operation during tougher times. And that's important because financial stress is steadily mounting against farmers across the country. Faced with uncertain financial security, many producers are turning to alternative money lenders for higher interest rate loans in order to save their farms. While traditional banks charge a modest 2 to 5% interest, these high interest loans can be as high as 30%. So what can be done? Market Journal's Bill Dodd has the story.
Thanks, Troy. According to the USDA, farm debt is projected to reach a record $416 billion this year. That would be a 40% increase from the year 2012, and as 2019 draws to a close, defaults and farm bankruptcies are rising and stifling the ability of cash-strapped farmers to secure funding for seed, fuel, and fertilizer, causing them to take out risky loans from non-traditional lenders.
After 5 years of hefty harvests, crop prices have been pushed down and diminished farm profits. Furthermore, flooding issues this year have left millions of acres unplanted, and the Trump administration's trade war on China has further depressed demand for U.S. crops. With all these factors piling up one after another, many ag producers are having a hard time applying for loans through traditional lending agencies and borrowing from alternative lenders at astronomical interest rates. According to Executive Director of Nebraska Farm Business Incorporated, Tina Barrett, this trend has been coming for some time. Many producers over the past several years have been reaching out to multiple lending agencies rather than one trusted institution, which in turn has created a lack of financial oversight.
We've got, even in the 20 years that I've been working with producers, we've seen lending from one position, one place, kind of go away with the introductions of John Deere Financial and Ag Direct and some of those direct market lenders, as well as input providers providing financing. We now have a lot of our producers who are getting lending from multiple sources, which means there's no one oversight that is watching the whole portfolio other than the producer. And so, as we do that, one of the things we've lost is the ability for that outside viewpoint to monitor everything. And so I think that, whether it's from a lender with a high interest rate or just multiple sources of lending, there's definitely been some oversight loss in that.
For many looking at higher interest loans, that route may be the last option. Some potential borrowers may have a previous business relationship with a trusted lender who just doesn't see a way to recoup their money and has to refuse the loan. If that's the case for someone needing additional funds, Tina tells me at this point it would be prudent to start examining your practices and finances to make sure a higher interest rate loan could work in your favor.
I think a lot of that comes down to really good cash flow planning and really good analysis. If you don't know where your business is, if the only thing that you know is that the lender that you're used to using said no more, then we really need to do a lot of work to figure out where that business is at. Because if we don't have a cash flow that can repay those even any loans, what's the point of paying more interest for it? Making sure that we have a plan that is reasonable, that makes sense for that operation is going to be really important.
These high-interest loans can be a blessing or a curse depending on your situation, but make no mistake, there is little to no risk for the lender in this scenario. These loans are high risk, high reward for some, and just plain high risk for others. If this is something you are considering, you should do so with extreme circumspection.
A lot of times, the lenders have themselves covered. Where they're going to have some sort of collateral to cover their risk of not being repaid. So from a producer standpoint, obviously your risk is that your interest continues to grow, that your equity continues to erode, and that when you're done with this, it might end up in a bankruptcy where you have nothing left. And so that's the one thing we don't want to do just for the sake of being able to farm one more year or even 2 more years. So we just got to watch that. But if we can potentially get that farm through a rough space, get them into a profitable position again, move forward with traditional lending, maybe these short-term high-interest loans, might be a good option.
Most decisions farmers make on a daily basis are a gamble. With a variety of unknown variables they face day to day, year in and year out, Tina suggests knowing your situation well before gambling on a high-interest loan that could fold your operation. If you're facing financial struggles due to an unforeseen event, much like the flooding we saw this year, for instance, a short-term higher-interest loan could be the solution you need. If, on the other hand, you've been facing profitability issues on top of unforeseen catastrophic events, you may be better off getting out with your equity intact.
I think it's a hard thing to look at. There's a lot of things to look at when an operation's in that kind of financial position where traditional lending's not where they're going to be at for a little while. There's certainly a place where if we think that there's enough health in the operation that we can get it turned around, that it was significant events, maybe a weather event that put them in that position, more so than just a downturn in profitability, maybe those things can be seen as a lifeline. The other thing to think about at that point is it worth continuing doing what hasn't been working? And are you better off to exit while you have some equity rather than try and find any source you can to go whether or not it's a feasible choice.
While it may be a hard pill to swallow, these loans have the potential to save an operation when they work and the ability to decimate livelihoods when they can't be repaid. These loans are not a magic bullet, and any producer that fails to efficiently produce a crop and viability may find themselves in a worse situation than they were in before taking a higher interest loan. Now, this is something we're going to continue to monitor, but for now, I'll send it back to you, Troy.
Thanks, Bill. We're ending today's broadcast with a look at some of the highlights from this year's Nebraska Power Farming Show. And it's been a great time here meeting viewers and seeing all that this show has to offer. Take a look.
The Nebraska Power Farming Show is in its 13th year. It's 9 acres of exhibits and 760 companies are here representing 2,300 booths. So we've got pure ag throughout.
Favorite thing I've seen so far was the Kenworth semis. They're beautiful. I just love seeing all this cool equipment, new stuff all in one area.
There's just a lot of different businesses that come out here, and they just try and not sell you, but they try and tell you what's best about their product, and that's nice just knowing that, being a mechanic myself and from college, so that's really cool.
We'll probably see anywhere from 16 to 18,000 people over the course of the 3 days.
We're with our Palmyra Ag class today, and we just came out here for a field trip and check out all the agricultural businesses.
It's really everything. It's so cool to be here. So many different booths here. It's really cool to be here in such a small place with so many booths in it.
Well, you're still in the epicenter of agriculture here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and this show is perfect because it lands at the year's end in December, so it's a buyer's show. You can see all the agriculture that you want all under one roof.
I enjoy looking and exploring about new companies here that I've never heard of before. I'm a student at the Career Academy, so it's interesting to me to see and learn about these companies.
My favorite thing is probably just all the equipment and just seeing what they have. Just like all the combines and equipment, it's pretty cool to see.
Well, we definitely try to bring new exhibitors to the show each year, and this year we have over 100 new exhibitors. So we keep pushing for technology, precision ag, aerial imaging. Next year we hope to bring more robotics, but this year we did snag Purdue University. They brought the AgBot Challenge.
I'm the ag teacher at Palmyra High School. I love the show every weekend. I use the information in my classes at Palmyra for the ag classes, ag business and marketing. The show is awesome. It's one of the largest indoor shows that I've ever been to that has everything you need and see. It's super.
Great time, and we'll do it again next year. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, we're talking 2020 crop budgets. The numbers are out, and we'll see what they say. Plus, Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners tells us what he's tracking in the markets. We'll see you then back in the studio for that and so much more. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.